So this video is intended to help you figure out ways when you get stuck of how you can find your errors, or debugging is a common programming term. And first of all, let's just look at what we have here. So I have a file, and before I look at the code, I have this picture where I spelled debugging wrong. That's great. Oh, debugging, there it is, debugging, doesn't matter. And if I click on the button, then what's being shown here is I've replaced the text that was in that div with the alt tag. So let's look at that again. So I have alt tag here. I'm going to refresh it. So in this div here's a div, and the div is saying what is the alt tag of the image. That's this div right here. And when I click on the click button, that fires off a on click event that then goes and looks at the alt tag and puts that, whatever's in the alt tag is putting that string, also misspelled, into this div. So, and that's what's happening. You can see I spelled experiment wrong. Anyway, we're not in a spelling test here. I would have to spell test before I turn this into my teacher. But let's just look at the code and what way I wanted to show of debugging. So first of all, just looking at the code, we have this image tag. We have an alt tag, which is obviously what we're trying to display. I have a div that I've set up, and this div is this information. Oops, let me refresh it. Is this information right here. Notice that this div has an ID of my div, and so it's your unique ID. And then we have a input type equals button, value equals click, which is just the word that's put in on the button. And then, oops, I didn't mean to click it, but I did. And then on click, and we've got quite a lot of fancy things going on here. On click has to go inside some quotations, and inside the quotations are what we're going to want happen when the on click event fires. So we've got a couple of things going on here. First, you can see that we've got some concatenating going on. So we're joining together a string, the alt tag says, and then we're joining whatever document get element by ID stitch the alt tag. So that's how we're getting this information here. Document get element by ID stitch is getting a hold of this entire element, and then we're being more specific and saying once we have that element, whatever it happens to be, in this case we want the alt property, and so that's the value that we're getting returned here is that string from the alt tag. So we're getting this string right here. We're concatenating that string to our string that says the alt tag says. And then this portion here is saying once you've got that string, go get the element by ID my div, go grab this div, this ID equals this div right here, go grab this div and utilize the InnerHTML property, which means what the InnerHTML property is whatever's in here. So the InnerHTML currently, the InnerHTML property of my div is this text. And we're saying whatever is in between the opening and closing div tag, in this case, InnerHTML, we're going to replace whatever's in here. That's what InnerHTML does. It just deletes whatever's in between this opening and closing tag, and it's going to replace it with the string that we created here. So that's how we're creating this particular form. So when I hit click, and in fact it's doing that. But what I also want to show you in this video is, sorry about the noise, husband is mowing in the background. Alright, so what I also wanted to demonstrate is what happens when things don't go right. There's a lot going on here, and it gets challenging because we have to be sure with our on click event that we've got our opening and closing tags properly, that we've properly done our single quotes underneath, single quote concatenation. So how do we know when things go wrong? How do we know what's going wrong? So let me show you a couple of clues. So let's do this. I'm going to first of all, let's see. What I think I'll do is I make capital ID. I'll make this capital ID. And so we all know that capital ID, well, I don't know if it's right or wrong, so I'm going to save it, and I'm going to run my code. I'm going to come over here to my browser and run my code and click on click, and nothing happens. Well, crap, what's going on? if you right click on your browser, this works in Chrome and it also works in Firefox, and you choose Inspect, you're going to get some extra help. And we've seen this probably from when we've worked with CSS and HTML. We've seen this part, but we haven't played a lot with this part. And so I can't really see it. So I'm going to, if you click on these little triple ellipse down here, you can change where you have this window showing up. So I'm going to put mine at the bottom because I think it's easier to see. And so if I go to console, and I can also see this red error here. If I go to console, it tells me uncaught type error, document get element by ID is not a function at HTML input on click. So it's giving me information as to where it's like a compile error, right? So if I click on that, I can also get a little bit more information, and it's trying to show me where the error is. And so it says on this line, I don't like something. And so that is a way for us to troubleshoot some of our code. So now I'm going to fix the ID and run it again. And now, in fact, that part's working. All right, so let me add a second part to this, another troubleshooting thing. All right, so I've already typed this part of the code in, and I'm just going to copy and paste it here. So all we're doing here is I've written a script tag that is document write. Remember that it's actually writing a p tag, and we're concatenating it just for a demonstration. I could have put it in the string here, but I'm just using a demonstration. So I'm concatenating a p tag with a string and concatenating the closing portion of that p tag. So if we save it and we look at our page again, I'm going to bring this inspect tool back up to the right because I think it's going to be easier for you to see. I'm going to click on elements, and what I want you to see is that as I look at, I'm going to open up all of these drop downs or whatever. Anyway, expand the view so I can see that actually what was written, you can see here that that p tag was physically written. So there's the JavaScript that's writing the tag, and here is the actual tag that's being displayed. So in other words, if I had put an h1 tag and then close the h1 tag, I should see what was physically written to my browser. So obviously it is an h1 tag, but the JavaScript actually writes the tag. Why is that important? Because sometimes when I'm troubleshooting, this is another good place to come when things aren't working out the way I had planned. In other words, let's say when I did this concatenation, that if I had left off, inadvertently I had left off a closing tag, my greater than sign to close that tag properly. And then I hit my refresh and I say, hey, where'd my h1 tag go? I put it in my document right, it's there, how come it's not showing up? Well, this is another place that you can come to double check your work. And granted, I'm using kind of a contrived example, but you get the idea. Now I can look at my h1 tag and I can see, oh, there's definitely something wrong with it. I'm missing my closing greater than part to complete that tag element. And so now when I refresh it, there's my tag. So in this video, I've gone over quite a number of things. First of all, kind of giving you another example of how we can concatenate, oftentimes concatenating the HTML directly in with our strings or other things. So we're concatenating using JavaScript, we're concatenating a string with our HTML. I've given you more demonstration of how this on-click works. I've given you a demonstration on how InnerHTML works, and again, concatenating a string, concatenating that with an actual value that I've gotten from my page, which is using get element by ID, and I'm grabbing this element, and I'm saying not only do I have that element, but now I need a particular piece. If you're familiar with object-oriented programming, I've got an object, and I need a particular property from that object. In this case, it's alt. So give me that object's alt property, which is a string, and concatenate that string with the literal string that I provided, and utilize all of that with the InnerHTML, which says take whatever this element happens to be. In our case, it happens to be a div. So go grab that div, and in between the opening and closing tags of that element, replace what was ever in there with the string that we created here. So hopefully that helps. not only help you troubleshoot, but perhaps help you with this week's assignment.